Hello, friends. Welcome to the Logistics of Logistics podcast. My name is Joe Lynch. Thank you so much for joining us today. On the Logistics of Logistics, I talk to experts in logistics and transportation, warehousing, fulfillment, supply chain, and of course, technology. And during these interviews, I'm always the one asking the dumb questions. I ask the dumb questions so you don't have to. Today's topic is Beyond the Yard, how Velostics Streamlines Scheduling with my friend Gaurav Khandelwal. Gaurav is the CEO of Velostics, a logistics software as a service company that automates scheduling for shippers, carriers, and logistics providers. Transportation scheduling can be a nightmare. It can cause late shipments, upset logistics partners, and detention charges. If dock scheduling is ruining your life, please take a listen to my conversation with Gaurav. How's it going, Gaurav?
Going great, Joe. Thanks for saying my name right.
Oh, I was just going to ask you, did I say your
Instead of
name
a
right?
trophy, you're doing great.
So, Gaurav, please introduce yourself and your company, where you're calling from today.
Yes, so Gaurav Khandelwal, I'm based out of Houston, Texas. Velostics is in the business of eradicating manual scheduling. There's about 1 billion truckloads a year in the US, just in the US every year, where over 60% are scheduled by phone calls or emails. And the other 40% still require a lot of manual intervention, a lot of legacy software that still causes a lot of pain. And so Velostics is a cloud-based, very simple to use scheduling platform that allows shippers to optimize all of their appointment booking, contactless check-in, all of their dock management, and yacht operations in one single platform. And best of all, Joe, we go live in 1 day.
Nice. So this dock scheduling in particular can be really a painful process because we have always hear how we're wasting drivers' time. With the ELD mandate, I don't know, 6-7 years ago, whenever it was, we lost capacity because of, when people got the electronic logging device, they realized, I think we lost 4% of the capacity. We're also realized now that drivers spend a lot of their time not driving. When a driver's not driving, he's not making money. And that's what we're paying him to do. That's what we're paying her to do. And the idea that they're now waiting around to load or unload, we know it's a problem. And if I could just throw out one more problem is if I'm a shipper and I say, oh, I'm going to let my 3PL manage my dock, they stuck with that one company, right? Now, some companies might be comfortable with that, but most large shippers have a lot of carriers that they're working with. I think only 30% of shipments go through a broker. And so you don't want one broker managing it. You don't want one carrier managing it. You want to be able to say, we're the shipper. We need our own process, our own technology that we own.
Yeah, no, I think you're hitting the nail on the head. It's not even just the fact that 3PLs are managing various warehouses. I think that's totally fine. I think the question comes down to, for the shipper, how is a shipper going to win against others, against competition? One of the biggest assets they have is data, right? Now, if you want a 3PL to manage your warehouse, that's totally fine. Let's just have them use a tool like Velostics, because now you have your entire network running on the same platform and you get access to clean data. We talk about generative AI and all the things that are happening in the space, but then everybody falls over because you got 5 different doc scheduling methodologies going on. You got some paper in some and spreadsheets in another and old software in the third. And when the question becomes, how do I optimize my inventory? Good luck. Now you need to hire some people to pull these reports together.
Yeah, it's one of those handoffs that consistently goes wrong. And when I think of a distribution center or a production facility, within those 4 walls, they have this documented process that usually gets better and better. And there's not a big logjam. And the drivers, once they get loaded, they are on the road. It's fairly predictable. There's traffic jams, there's weather, but they know what's going on. This is a handoff. And you said before we hit record, they said, if you think about the race that we're all in, the baton handoffs, then that big sprint, that's where the problems are. That's where one person's slowing down, the other one's slowing, not quite running yet. And a lot of times the handoff is where they drop the ball or drop the baton, but if not dropping it, at least slowing it way down. And it's a good way to look at what's going right or going wrong in this space.
Yeah, if you think about the e-commerce world and what's happened there, looking at that analogy, talk about digital banking, etc. One word that people used to use a lot, which was frictionless. You don't want friction in the process, but you think about the operations in any warehouse outside the warehouse walls, but inside the yard fence, there's still a lot of friction in these handoffs that you're talking about. You're exactly right. And it's not even just the friction between the driver and the warehouse operations, but it's also the process, the check-in, the payments, the accessorials, the bill of lading, the yard operations, right? Drop and hook, all of these require multiple handoffs. There's a lot of friction, which is why they're so inefficient.
Yep. And a lot of times if you're the driver, if you slow me down multiple hours or can't unload on Friday night, I got to come back Monday morning. There's a lot of things that go wrong. A lot of times those drivers are missing their next load. They're missing their backhaul. So it's something that it's a hassle for the shipper, obviously, but carriers aren't going to want to come to your location if they go. The problem with delivering to that location is they never get you unloaded on time. They don't know what they're doing at the dock. And so you're going to miss your next backhaul. Or what if you say, I have to bake in a half a day over there because I don't know how it's going to work?
Yeah, exactly. Look, we use Domino's Pizza Tracker, right? We want to see how quickly is the pizza going to be done. And then we want to see the pizza guy driving up to our house. And so these concepts are very clear and well understood in the consumer world. But when you think about the business world, there's no reason why we shouldn't be thinking about a tracker. Let's just say we call it at Velostics turn time, right? What is the turn time? It's like the pit stop, changing a tire on an F1 race, right? 10 seconds or less, right? That's your time to and make a break. It doesn't matter how good the driver is, right? If your pit stop is bad, you lose the race,
Yeah,
right?
that's the same with swimming. Get to that wall
Yeah.
and you turn, you do that fancy turn at I usually would hit my heels on the on the deck of the pool, but the fancy turn that they taught us to do. Anyway,
Yeah, so that turn time is such an interesting metric just to make sure for a shipper to understand across all their facilities, how quickly are they able to turn a truck around?
yep. Gaurav, tell us a little bit about you. Where'd you grow up? Where'd you go to school? Some career highlights before you started Velostics.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. So I grew up in India, came to the States for undergrad, went to a small town in northern Indiana called Goshen. The school was called Goshen College. It was quite interesting. It was a Mennonite college, amazing people, very hardworking people, loved my time there. But it was in the middle of this Amish country. So imagine growing up in
Wow.
India with rolling blackouts back in the 80s and 90s, and then you come here and then you meet people that don't want power. It was quite the culture shock. And I was like, are you kidding me? This is where I landed up. But really enjoyed working there.
So I'm just curious, when you got to Goshen, and I know a little bit about Indiana. I live not too far from there. What was what was your first winter like, and what surprised you the most about moving from India to the U.S.?
I think the thing that surprised me the most was that people wanted to give you hugs. You grew up in a city with 12 million people. Nobody gives you a hug, right? They keep their head down and they go about their day. And then you come to a small town and then you see people walking on the other side of the street waving at you. And if you've met them before, they want to come give you a hug. And I thought that's what the American culture was. I was like, great, everybody gives each other hugs. It's fantastic. Until my first job in New York City, I tried to give somebody a hug. I almost got hit across my face. Like, what are you doing? I was like, wait, I thought everybody loves to give hugs around here. But no, it's just small town versus city. It's the same around the world.
So what'd you study at Goshen, and give us the rest of your career highlights before I interrupted you?
Yeah, no problem. I studied computer science and MIS, double major at Goshen. Didn't have any money when I came from India. Did multiple jobs. My first job was cleaning toilets at 18. And then very soon I realized that wasn't going to be enough to pay for my tuition. So I had to hustle and start companies in college. And so just did different things, including selling kitchen knives for Cutco, which by the way is great sales training.
you're the second person who said that. Nick, my friend, I'm trying to think, blank. Nick D'Angelo did that too.
Yeah, yeah.
It's sales boot camp.
Yeah, it totally is. It's just discipline. And then worked for a consulting firm in New York for 7 years. Saw a lot of change management fail at these large companies. Steve Jobs announces the App Store in 2008, and this was 6 months before my wedding. And I told my fiance at the time, sweetheart, I'm going to quit my job and start a business. And she was like, you're out of your mind. We're Indian. We have 4-day weddings and we pay for it all. How's this all going to happen? So I was like, we'll figure it out. And started this company called Chai One, started building apps. And a couple of years later, Apple called us, said, hey, we've heard about you guys. Love the way that you guys approach design. We want to partner with you, bring you to large industrial companies. And so over the next 5 or 10 years, we work with some of the top Fortune 50 companies in the world, building enterprise B2B software, mostly on mobile. And in that journey, we saw this problem with logistics. We saw trucks lined up everywhere. We saw massive inefficiencies in the way they were running their operations, drivers waiting for hours, companies missing their production schedules, inventory piling up everywhere, cost of capital being a big deal. And so one of our customers at the time said, hey, can you just start a new company and solve this problem of lines for us? We have this massive issue. We lose millions a year in detention costs. And so that's kind of how Velostics was born. And so when COVID happened in 2020, that was my sign that, okay, the world is telling you, the universe is telling you something. Let's go ahead and solve this business, solve this problem.
What I love about where you come from there is we have applications that we use in our day-to-day life, and I sometimes call those applications the consumer apps. They for a long time were like a higher level than what we used at work, and now I see it almost seamless. We expect in our work life consumer grade technology. Before we hit record today, you mentioned the Domino's app, and it's simple, it's elegant. One extra button, one extra click is the difference between it being good and great. And I think we see that in all of our consumer grade technology. When you're using Lyft, I hadn't used Lyft for a minute, and I thought, oh, okay, I was in San Diego and I said, oh, I got to use Lyft. I was like, oh, I downloaded it on my new phone. I was like, oh, great. And then I was like, oh, my credit card expired. I got to put the new one in. And I was like, oh, I forgot how to use it. The whole thing, downloading it, putting my credit card in there, and getting a car took me 2 minutes. That would have been hours in the past. I wouldn't have even attempted it. And I didn't even have my glasses on. That was like easy, right? That's the expectation that we're starting to have for our applications at work. That's just, the bar is high.
Exactly right. Because we did custom software development for 15 years, we saw the pain associated with implementing large scale enterprise software. And a lot of customers would push off massive value generating initiatives to the following years because IT had no time. They were so backed up with stuff. And so we said, okay, we really have to challenge ourselves. If we have to launch a new business, there has to be a massive incentive for someone to change, like a 10x incentive. What could that be? And so one of the biggest things was you have to go live in a day. This thing can't take 6 months to implement, right? And how do you go live in a day? People ask me, how do you do that? One of the things is it's completely self-serve. It's a consumer experience. When your warehouse person logs in, they don't have to get trained on it. It's just like you just said, it's like using Lyft.
Yeah, I've said this on the last couple podcasts I've done, and it's very much a trend that I'm hearing from technologists. We used to develop technologies, and I can go much further back when we first started using software to solve problems. It was months of development, and then once this technology started to be used, there's all sorts of bugs and problems, and we're only using 50% of the solution, and then we're at 60% of the solution. And you'd be 4, 5, 6 months in when sometimes they'd say this isn't working or we need an upgrade. And Getting technology was a leap of faith. And if you picked up any business magazine or Harvard Business Review, it would talk about the nightmare of software implementations. That isn't what we're experiencing anymore. Everybody who's developing technology now is saying quick wins, really easy implementation, and there can't be a lot of training and onboarding. It has to be minimized. One last story. I was talking to as a vice president of a logistics of a very large company, and he was also in charge of service parts for this very large company. And he said when he got there, he didn't like this. He didn't like the way their software worked. So, and they had all these distributors and reps who had to use that system. So he said to the operators, I want you to develop something like Amazon. It should look as much like Amazon as possible. And all the reps from around the country and around the world were saying, when will we be able to come get training at your location? And he said, no, there's no training. And everyone's, what do you mean there's no training? He says, it's Amazon. Amazon doesn't have training. Domino's app doesn't. You don't go do Domino app training for an hour and then go, now I can order pizza and track it. So I love what you guys are doing that way.
Yeah, and the thing is that a lot of people end up using spreadsheets because they don't have time for training, or they don't want to pay for training, or they don't, want to go through the process. And the majority of the market that we're going after, believe it or not, has been companies that did not deploy any kind of automation in their operations because they're like, we don't need it. We can just do it on whiteboards or spreadsheets. But again, the problem comes back to what I said at the very beginning, which is poor data. So if you have an operations leader or a supply chain leader trying to figure out, hey, how do I make my network resilient? How do I avoid a COVID-like disruption? How do I make sure that I don't go out of business? You just don't have good data. And so that's why for us, for most companies, just replacing the spreadsheets with Velostics is super simple.
Yep. Yeah. And you've talked about frictionless. You've also made the decision somewhat frictionless. I can try this out. I'm going to be either quickly on board, which I'm assuming will be the case in the vast majority of the time, or questioning. But it's not going to be like, oh, I'll give it a try for 2 months. 2 months you'll be a veteran. You try it out and you say minimum onboarding. We start to see some quick wins, and I have data. And I think any operations leader now, expectations is I'm going to have data around the problems that I have so I can go and look for solutions.
Yeah, a lot of our buying persona is typically a director of transportation or logistics at a medium to large shipper. And what we find is that they generally have some TMS in place. And if they don't, then they're looking for one. And when they have something like that, then we integrate with that TMS, an Oracle OTM or a Mercury Gate. We're out of the box, natively integrated with both of those TMSs. They see value in the investment they've already made in those TMSs, right? And so the data flows right back into those. And so it creates even more efficiencies in the operations.
I love it. I love it. So who are your primary customers? Are they the shippers?
Yeah, primary customers are shippers. So we're finding that the large distribution companies are also becoming customers. So 3PLs, those are the primary customers of ours.
So,
and one more thing I would say is there's just one more category that's emerging fast, which is large brokers are starting up managed transportation offerings where they're managing warehouses and facilities on behalf of shippers. And we're finding that those brokerages are very interested in what Velostics has to offer to enable them to become better 4PLs.
I like it. I like it. So when we were prepping, we identified 6 areas that I want to talk about on this, which is what you guys do. So the first thing that you had told me was Velostics eliminates all that manual scheduling, all the emails, text messages, spreadsheets. So please explain.
Yeah, the key thing is when we looked at the market, what we saw were 4 or 5 different areas that were all disjointed. We saw that companies were using some sort of appointment scheduling or none. They had no way to do contactless check-in. So drivers would drive out, get out of this cab and walk to the clerk's office, and often would just loiter in the parking lot, and your truck's driving around, all sorts of safety issues. We saw that some companies were using some version of doc scheduling, some didn't have any, and then some were using your products as well. And what we saw was a complete disjointed ecosystem. So you could be in the same shipper and have three different systems that you were using to manage all your scheduling. And so we said, okay, how do we solve this problem? Make it simple for anyone to run reports on benchmarking. Who are the best carriers, the worst carriers, the best suppliers, the best customers? What are my throughput metrics look like? What does my turn time look like? And when we asked these questions, most people kind of gave us a blank look like, I don't know, like I have to download these reports, right? And so we said, okay, why don't we start with appointment scheduling? Because time is money, Joe, right? Let's just start with figuring out what time are you supposed to show up. Don't just let trucks show up whenever, right? And what we saw was an immediate benefit for the shipper in terms of labor cost savings. Immediately, they were able to say, we have some full-time labor, we have some contract labor. When we have busy times, when we have lots of appointments, we're going to hire the contract labor. If not, we're not going to hire them. So now that demand-based recruiting enabled them to save some operational costs right away. The next thing we saw was that this idea of drivers kind of loitering in the parking lot or coming into the clerk's office didn't have to be there. Drivers don't want to do that. They want to be on their way, to your point earlier. So we said, what if we did not do what everybody was doing, which is another driver app? Right now, this was painful for me because coming from an app development background, you had to make some really good apps. But in this case, we interview drivers, we spend time in warehouses, we walk the floor with them and the yard with them, and then we realize that no, that's just too much friction because some drivers may never show up at the same facility again, right? A lot of them were downloading and removing the apps from their phone because they were afraid of being tracked or any of that stuff. So we did the consumer thing. We just said, look, do you guys know how to text? And they were like, are you kidding me? Of course. I'm not a grandpa. I know how to text. Great. We'll just use texting. And so we implemented contactless check-in through texting, check-in and check-out. Drivers love that because they can do that very easily. Again, no training required.
Yeah, I think also what's nice about texting is it is, first off, everyone knows how to do it. All drivers know how to do it. But on top of that, I don't have to download your app. So let's just say a driver says, I'm only using this at 2 places and I have to download this app. Someone won't do it. There is app fatigue. We all use apps on our phones and we like them. By the way, I'm an Android guy. So I can't speak to, sorry, everybody. I hate to disappoint. I use those apps and I love the ones that I have, but there's the 5 or 6 that I use all the time, maybe 7. And then there's the other 40 that are on there that I always think, can I delete this one without screwing my phone up? And for drivers, and by the way, I'm probably part of this problem. I had a lot of people on my podcast say, all you have to do is download our app. And they're gone now, so I can speak of them. But Convoy was said, download our app and let us track you that way, and we'll pay you tomorrow. So that was a big deal to pay carriers overnight to use their app. And I always think that is, you have a lot of venture capital money, maybe you go ahead and do that, but not everybody feels comfortable paying next day. So they were paying for the downloads then at that 1 minute. Not every app can do that.
Yeah. Yeah, no, look, if your source of income comes through a service like Convoy and you have to have an app for that, then that's your choice. That's your primary source of income, right? And you use it every single day. It's different than companies requiring various sorts of apps that don't have that shelf life, right? They expire much sooner.
We have done a really good job over the last 10, 15 years developing transportation management systems, and we're still developing new ones. I talked to a new TMS company on a regular basis, and I think the bar gets higher and higher. So we've gotten really, I will say, efficient on that, effective. And what we're still have a lot of problems is at the docks, at the handoff. And you mentioned drivers get there and sometimes wait, depending on the facility, they can wait a long time. And when they get out of their truck and walk across the yard, there's a chance that they get injured. There's always that potential. Anybody who's running a facility doesn't want strangers, people who aren't familiar with the location, people who aren't trained in that facility's rules, walking. if they're walking through a production facility, there's oftentimes grease or water, whatever. Somebody slips and falls. It's a problem not only from a legal and an insurance perspective, but also, does anyone really want to deliver to a location where you say it's a kind of a dangerous location and a lot going on there, and you got to walk like a half a mile up to an office, and I see some woman there and she tells me this, or this guy there tells you that. That is all very negative. So we got to get out of that. The drivers it has to be real clear what they're supposed to do there. And we don't want them lingering. Anybody who's lingering in a production facility or distribution location, first off, they don't want to do it. And secondly, the facility really doesn't want that guy. He doesn't have the safety training. And so it's a lose-lose. That guy or that gal has to linger until you get them loaded or unloaded.
Yeah, if we look at, we fly a lot, right? And imagine if the pilot of the plane was just loitering around at the bar or mixing and mingling with other pilots at the restaurant, and you're sitting there in the plane wondering, where is the pilot? Like, why isn't this plane leaving?
Yep. Yep. So we already touched on the second point, which is communication and being text-based. So when they get a text from Velostics, is it open into an app saying, explain what that looks like?
Yeah, it's very simple. It works in two different ways. One is we give the facilities a QR code. Like when you walk into a restaurant, sometimes you'll see a Square QR code or a Yelp QR code. It's very similar. We give them a QR code and the drivers can scan the QR code. Many times drivers are not all American or even Hispanic. They could be Eastern European, they could be Indian, they could be some other nation around the world. They don't speak English. And so how do you make it simple for them? So everybody knows how to use a QR code around the world now at this point. And so when they scan a QR code, it just sends them to a website, very simple website. They just put in the PO number, boom, pulls up the shipment and says, is this you? And they have different language paths. They can pick the language that they're using and they say yes, and that's it. They're checked in. So that's one way of doing it. The other is we just put a phone number up, our phone number up at the gate. And the driver just has to text that number, just has to say hi, and we send them the same link back, and they click on the link and they can check in the exact same way.
So that's the check-in. How about if they want to reschedule somewhere along the way? Saying they're 8 hours away and they're supposed to deliver in 4 hours. How can they reschedule? They're supposed to deliver in 4 hours, but they aren't going to make it. How do they reschedule?
Yep, two ways that we're doing it. One, depending on the shipper and the TMS they're using, and if they're tied in with an ELD provider, we can do dynamic rescheduling, where the driver doesn't have to do anything at all. Okay, based on the truck's location, we can recommend a different slot for the shipper and say, hey, shipper, are you okay if we move this appointment to like later in the day because this driver is not going to make it? And the shipper can say, absolutely, help me manage my labor better, right? This is great. This is painless, frictionless, fantastic. If we move that slot, we just let the driver know, the scheduler know over email, just the same way they booked the appointment the first time. So that's one way where it's painless for everybody with dynamic rescheduling.
What about the other way around? Let's just say I am the shipper and I say, oh, wow, we got slammed today with some unexpected work. I don't need that driver here until 2 p.m. and he's going to get here at 11 a.m. Can I let them know?
Yes. So the way that the process works today is when the shipper's broker books a load on their TMS, whichever carrier they've selected gets an email with a booking link. Okay. And they get an email with the booking link, they click on the link, and that's how they get the appointment. The same link they can use to reschedule. The same email will be used for them to get any notifications around changes in that appointment.
Yeah, and what I like about that is you get that notification in at the right time. You go, oh, okay, maybe I take some of my rest hours. Maybe I go eat. Maybe I go to a truck stop and hang out and do some of my billing or whatever else. Make some phone calls. You might have to reschedule your next load, right? So if you say, I'm supposed to pick up a load later today, I think I'll do it first thing in the morning because of this delay. At least it gives you enough time to determine your own schedule. I've had drivers on my podcast a few times, and one of the things they always talk about is, as a driver, you're always planning and then replanning and replanning. They said it's very seldom is it just you pick up and then you deliver. There's always weather, traffic, delays at the pickup location or delivery location. So they are constantly replanning. And we all know when you're replanning, it helps to have more notice rather than less notice.
Yeah, absolutely.
So third thing I wanted to talk to you about was labor cost savings. How does this save us on labor costs?
Yeah, as we know, the US economy is a little bit lopsided, right? There's certain segments that are booming and others not so much. Manufacturing, reshoring, nearshoring, all of that is booming. And labor at the dock, in a warehouse or in a yard are at a premium. And so companies are really trying to figure out how do I optimize my costs? And so they don't want to pay for labor to just sit around if a truck isn't going to make it, right? They don't want to have labor taking phone calls and emails from brokers and carriers for appointments. They don't want to have labor sitting around at a clerk's office just to check in drivers. And so by automating these pieces, we reduce the need for labor at these facilities. Not to mention that if, as we talk later in today's discussion about dock management and yard management, what we're trying to do is to say, hey, if we could make this a completely frictionless experience for the shipper, how do we remove the need for any kind of paper or payments or other things that happen manually to also happen electronically, right? And so that's how the labor savings is not just at the warehouse, but also in the back office. And they're quite substantial.
Yeah, and I think also before we hit record this morning, I was looking at some news, and more companies are talking about this 4-day work week, which is great. But I think what this means is we're going to have to get better at scheduling. And not everybody is going to do a 4-hour work week, clearly. But jobs like loading and unloading trucks at a dock. I've had lots of jobs, but I never did that job. But I can imagine how difficult it is. I've watched people load and unload trucks. I think a lot of them are going to be young people. It's going to skew young. And a lot of them are going to say, I want either my free time or I go to school when I'm not doing this. So if I can say definitively, I know when we load and unload, I don't have to hire people and to say, hey, I need you to be here from 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. Maybe you go, yeah, we're scheduled in a way that we only need them in the afternoon. So they can do whatever they want in the morning, whether they're going to school or watching a kid or whatever they're doing. I think we're going to have to get better because I worked in automotive engineering for many years. And especially when I was younger, I was a CAD guy, computer aided design. I spent endless hours not working, just sitting and just sitting there. And we would work. Sometimes we'd be on overtime, just sitting. Don't ask me to explain it, but they'd say, you have to work this weekend. I was like, we aren't doing anything. Not only is it a huge waste of money, but it's boring. And what we were there because they were afraid they were going to run into a launch glitch with a part and that it would have to be redesigned quickly. And we have all these guys on staff. That's a stupid way to work.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, like I said at the beginning, time is money, right? And it's an old saying, but it holds true for hundreds of years. It's just important to figure out like where can we find constraints in our process? Where can we optimize those constraints, remove those constraints? And the best way of doing that is finding these very manual, very labor intensive tasks and see if we can automate them with technology.
Yep. And so right next to that one, you have detention. So talk about how this can help us save on detention.
Yeah. And that detention was the genesis of where we were finding big customer problems when we first were researching this space. And two areas that we found were big. One was just trucks waiting outside the walls of a facility to be loaded or unloaded. And then just these massive discrepancies and finger pointing on whose fault it was. Because again, there was no clear documentation or audit trail of what happened. The other thing we found was companies that had high volume operations or smaller warehouses would drop the trailer in the yard. They would ask the broker or the carrier to drop the trailer in the yard. And often they would lose the trailer, right? Where is it? It's behind 3 other trailers. I don't know where it went. And so you have the yard jockey looking for this particular trailer. And In the heat of the moment, like there's 150 trucks coming in every single day, you lose it. It's hard if it's not automated. So the detention cost per day basis also can be quite substantial for large facilities. And so what we found is that nobody likes detention. Not the carrier, not the broker, not the shipper, not even these detention analysts. If you go on LinkedIn, you'll find there's literally thousands of detention analysts in this country that do nothing but fight detention. And so by providing these timestamps, we can eliminate that completely.
Yeah, and detention is one of those things where we think, oh, okay, I had to pay that an extra $300, an extra $400. But I always think that's the superficial cost. The other cost is that carrier saying, you know what? That doesn't even cover all of our costs associated with this because we missed a load that we're supposed to pick up later today. The driver, maybe he missed a family event. He thought he'd be home that night, and now he's going to spend another night on the road. Detention is just it's tangible, so we talk about it, but the intangible parts of delay is probably worth far more than the $300-400 that you paid for it.
Yep, exactly. No, I think for us to have a resilient supply chain and a well-oiled machine, we have to be able to track any kind of dwell time, trailer time in a much more intuitive and easy manner for everyone involved.
Yep. So another point that we had talked about before we hit record was this cost of capital and inventory. Please explain.
Yeah, that's a big one. And it's coming from the energy industry and being here in Houston. We saw the customer that we had worked with have months and months of inventory on hand. On the one hand, you have companies like Zara that have a 14-day inventory turn, right? They can turn the entire inventory just in 14 days. And then you have some major industrial companies that inventory turn is 0.1, which means once in 10 years, they'll turn the inventory. And so what companies oftentimes, to avoid any kind of risk to their business, they'll hoard inventory or they'll keep inventory, months of inventory on hand. That's a problem because that's all capital tied up. That's working capital that could be used elsewhere in the business. And so what we found was that because they had poor visibility into scheduling and did not trust the data that they were getting, they were just by happenstance,
You
they would
buy
just
more.
yeah, exactly. So nobody got fired for buying more, right? So they'll just buy more, but you wouldn't get fired if you're not out of stock, right? So it hurts you both ways, right? You have too much inventory, too little inventory, you get hurt. By providing a reliable scheduling platform, we found that customers can cut their cost of capital of keeping inventory by at least a third.
Yes. And by the way, we all are talking about sustainability so much more now. If you're working with a large company, they're going to have a sustainability goal. And one of the things that comes up on my podcast every once in a while is how much inventory we hold and how much of that inventory never gets to see the end consumer. And I've told my own story. I've shipped auto parts to China. And while it was on the ocean, I called my counterpart and said, hey, that first container, just scrap it. That's all, just scrap. And they'd say, oh, we'll rework the parts so they're to the next level. No, they can't be reworked. They have to be just scrap. And we do that with all sorts of goods. We know luxury goods. If I send luxury goods back, a lot of times it just gets in the landfill. I've heard up to 1/3 of the stuff we create in our supply chains never gets to see the end consumer. So somebody says to us right now in the supply chain, you guys have to lower your carbon footprint, be a better citizen of the planet. The best thing we can do is manage our inventory better.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. Yeah, exactly. And then you also have waste, to your point, right? Some of that stuff goes bad. And so now you have to order more. But yeah, if you could optimize how much you hold, you definitely would reduce your carbon footprint. You're exactly right.
And your carrying costs, of course. So that's one of those that you tell the boss, hey, we reduced our carrying costs. And by the way, that's good for our sustainability.
Yes.
So last thing I wanted to talk to you about was benchmarking and scorecards. Please elaborate.
Yeah, that's my favorite. We kind of come a full circle around data, right? When you think about how much time companies are spending on evaluating carriers, evaluating brokers, They want to understand how to operate their businesses better. You have to have some way of benchmarking. And you can benchmark your own supplier base. You can benchmark your own facilities in terms of throughput, right? Who's doing better, who's doing worse, right? But you can also then say, hey, I wonder how do we compare to the rest of the industry, right? Or wait, how do we compare against other industries? And that's kind of where it starts to really get interesting. When you think about all the continuous improvement people, like going back to my first job out of college, right? Just doing a lot of change management, business transformation work, is that you need data to be able to drive transformation. And so benchmarking is really important from that perspective. And so we're able to, do that. We have 16,000 trucking companies on our platform that use it to book appointments on a daily basis. And so we're collecting tons of data that we can help companies with. So that's one part of it. The other part of it is scorecarding. And so what if you could take the data that you're collecting on behalf of the suppliers and carriers and others and make it visible to them? What if you could just say, hey, look, you're number 8 out of 10 in performance. I'm not showing anybody's names. I'm just telling you in terms of on-time performance, you're number 8. In terms of like check-in performance, you're number 4. And here are some things that you could be doing to get better. Now, carriers want to get better. Drivers want to get better. And so when they are given this data, they understand, okay, when the next RFP comes out, right, I know what to do so that I can win this job. And shippers want to be shippers of choice. They want to attract the best drivers and the best carriers, right? They want to have the best safety records, right? And so when it benefits both sides if there's transparency. So the way that we built our analytics platform is all around being able to share those dashboards easily with your business partners, set up exceptions and notifications and alerts immediately when something doesn't work, something that feels out of place. And then last but not the least, all of this data can be piped into our shippers reporting systems. So if they have a data lake, for example, we can send all the data to them so then they can use that as part of their own data science projects.
Yeah, Gaurav, before we hit record, we are talking about generative AI. I know you're very deep into that. I always think when we say scorecard, I always like a scorecard that has 5 KPIs, key performance indicators. And I say only the best metrics grow up to be those 5 KPIs and some sort of cost measure, on-time performance. I like to measure billing accuracy, something for sustainability at this point, maybe the carrier performance. I want that scorecard because it's the shorthand. So if I know those 5 things are going right, probably the other 70 metrics that we capture are also going right. But when I start talking about AI, my simple brain only wants to see 5 KPIs, but the AI engine that we're using might say, give us all the data you have because we're going to develop new insights. And that's where I always think is as soon as we start having that data, we're going to get recommendations from systems that just get better and better.
Yeah, look, I think that's like on top of all of this data and benchmarking is the generative AI. And one of the best things that we're finding as we're experimenting with different things to create value for customers is trends, right? I don't want to see a lagging indicator of something that already happened. Give me the leading indicator, right? Hey, where am I going wrong today? What's not working today, right? Now, if I have to go and sort through 8 different reports to pull the data, that's going to take a full FTE. I don't want to do that. I'm an executive. I'm busy. I'm on a plane. I'm going somewhere. I'm going to a conference. I'm going to speak in the next hour. Let me pull up my Velostics generative AI bot and I could just ask it the question.
I love that. I love it.
It'll tell me an answer right away in a format that I understand that I can quickly mention to people in a sales meeting or at a talk or whatever it may be. I think the value of generative AI really gets captured when you have clean data. And that's the promise of Velostics, right? To have one stack where all this data sits in one place. Now you can really get really powerful in terms of operationalizing efficiencies in your business.
Right. And there's another trend I see all the time, which is we used to get reports and it was what happened last week. And it would take us a few days to pull it together. And we'd pull it together and say, here's what we did last week. And that was good. It would help us say, okay, here's some problems. Let's make sure we don't do them again this week or next week. But again, it's a lagging, it's Monday morning quarterback, right? I think as you go forward, you're going to start saying, hey, we we see some things and you're going to get alerts where you say, as soon as we see this and this, we're going to send an alert, say, hey, warning, this is probably going to jam up my dock. We're seeing the following indicators. And when we see those indicators, it often leads to delays. So reschedule this guy or whatever you need to do. And I suspect it's going to give you recommendations on what to do to avoid inconveniencing drivers and jamming up the loading dock.
Yeah, exactly. It's how companies want to use it. One of the ways that we're seeing it is just like an early warning system, to your point, right? Hey, these are the things that we typically find that go wrong in your operation. And look, this one carrier has been late 8 out of 10 times. This one facility has taken 40% longer to check and check out trucks than other facilities in your network. Why is that happening? It's probably because you have some sort of labor issues or maybe processes that working at those facilities. So to your point, highlighting those things early helps these companies get better.
So before we summarize this, I want to talk about implementation. If somebody's listening and says, okay, I'm a shipper and I work with some brokers, I work with a 3PL or two, and I work with a lot of carriers, and I need something like this. And they reach out and they talk to you and your team. What's the process look like after they begin working with you?
The process is very simple. All we need is a spreadsheet to get going. Whatever that they're doing today, if they have that in a manual spreadsheet, great. If they are using a legacy TMS, they can export a spreadsheet out of that. They can drop it to SFTP. And so for us to stand up an instance for a customer takes less than 2 hours. So if a customer has 10 facilities or they have 200 facilities, it doesn't matter because the way we've designed it, it's all scripted, right? So we can stand up these facilities and every single one of them can be configured their own way in terms of doctors, etc.
So is it giving me recommendations within a day or so and saying this is how to improve this process?
I think you probably need about 30 days of data in there before it can start giving you some recommendations. But once you have the facility set up, it's one website, one URL. You give it to all your carriers, suppliers, customers. You say, look, this is my branded booking page. Everybody go here from now on. Don't call me, don't email me, right?
So it's not a Velostics page, it's their company page.
Yeah, exactly. It's a branded page, company name.velostics.com. It's their URL. They can share it with all of these people that are working with them. And then once the system is set up, all we need to do is ingest their spreadsheet that has a PO number or a shipment number or a load number, some way to validate the transaction.
There's going to be an enormous amount of data on this when you have all of these different. I know you're not going to share one customer's information with another customer. You make it anonymous, but there's going to be an enormous amount of data really quickly.
Yeah, exactly. We're starting to shape some things like that. Hopefully later this year, we will release our first benchmark report that I think customers really enjoy. We're trying to keep it simple. We're trying to keep it to your point. Give me like 6 key things that I need to improve in my business. I don't have time to read a 30-page report, right?
And so the Velostics solution integrates. Do you have an API that lets me connect to all the transportation management systems?
Absolutely. We are an API first company. We have a TMS API and we have a scheduling API. TMS API will tie into any TMS out there. We're already integrated with Trimble, with Oracle OTM, with Mercury Gate. We're working on SAP. And then on the API side, with third-party connectors like an EDI connector, we use middleware software like a Boomi or a MuleSoft or an Orderful or a Clee, any of these systems that many companies are already using as their middleware. We tie into those so that promise of go live in a day is realized.
Yeah, so the old fashioned, it's going to take a month to integrate with your transportation management systems. Those are yesterday's conversations.
Yeah, the only caveat is that if you have a homegrown custom,
yeah, I was just going to say that.
TMS, yes, we provide the API for them to go at it and do the integration yourself, or we can help you, but those are a little bit tougher.
Yes, of course. So Gaurav, one other thing I want to talk to you about is you guys have a yard solution. Talk a little bit about what your yard solution does.
Yeah. So Joe, we didn't want to be another yard management software company or a yard management product company. There's a bunch of them already out there. But when we canvassed the market and we talked to our customers, we found that it's like an elephant when you're looking for a mouse, so to speak. People wanted something simple and nimble that they could deploy quickly. And so that's why we built our yard solution to complete our stack with our appointment scheduling, text message based check-in, and doc management solution. The reason why it's such a interesting add-on to what our customers are doing is because it still goes live in one day. It's all web-based. They have the optionality to add on RFID or cameras or hardware or drones, whatever they want later, but they can get value out of Velostics Yard in one day. And that's what's so compelling about it.
So what problem is Velostics Yard solving?
There's several. One is that customers were complaining about detention and just like, where's my trailer? And hey, I don't need RFID. I don't need all this heavy implementation. I just need to figure out my detention costs. Where's my trailer? And so can I do that in a simple way? So that's one. Second, customers that are a bit more sophisticated were saying, listen, I need shorter moves. I need not be driving all over the yard looking for where the trailer is. I need it integrated with my dock, right? They want faster moves. They want faster turns. And oftentimes, this type of efficiency drives serious savings for a company. And so the software automatically recommends the closest dock and the closest yard spot based on whatever equipment you're bringing in, whatever's on the truck. This makes everybody much more efficient. The jockeys are happier. And the last thing is that because it ties into the shipment number or the PO number or the load number, whatever the primary key is that we're using for the entire shipment, it enables them to do benchmarking better. One more thing, Joe, just to add to the end, is drop and hook. The key thing that customers are looking for was how do we enable drop and hook where they can get an appointment, sure, but they don't need to come into the clerk's office. The driver can just come in, check in, drop a trailer, pick the next one and go. How do we make it easy for them? The way we have done that, Joe, is that we've enabled all of this to work through API. So we can expose the API to brokers and to carriers, and they can ping the API and they can see where the trailer's parked. They can see if it's full or empty, all through API. And so again, going back to frictionless operations, they don't have to call someone, text someone, show up and talk to anyone. This is completely and natively available by API.
Yep. And when you talk about drop and hook, you're as the driver, I know a lot of drivers prefer it because they get there, they might be empty. They pull up, they just hook up the full trailer and they leave. They're not sitting there they're not waiting for an hour to get loaded. It's not a live load. And from what I understand, it takes off 2 hours I think that's funny on my podcast. They said it was like a half hour versus 2.5 hours. And again, every location is going to be a little different. Every load's going to be a little different, but it makes the driver's day much more predictable. If he says, I can drop off there and pick up there. So maybe he drops off an empty trailer, picks up a full one, and is on his way very quickly. And if you can help him avoid even the trip to the office, because again, you walked up to the office and maybe somebody's on break, maybe it's lunchtime. And again, you all of a sudden added a half an hour, 40 minutes to this guy's day that is unpredictable. And we got to get away from that.
Exactly.
I love it. I love it. So the yard solution, is that something you guys have already launched?
Yes, sir. We just launched it last week. We go live at a large facility that does over 150 trailers per day next month, which is here in a couple of days, coming into June. We're very excited about it. We are partnering with several key customers. We have some tremendous advisors. We can't thank them enough on helping us design this solution. We're super excited to change the way that companies handle yard.
Excellent. Excellent. So I'm going to summarize, and then I want to get your final thoughts, Gaurav. So I'm talking to my friend Gaurav, and we're talking about beyond the yard, how Velostics streamlines scheduling. So we talked about a whole bunch of stuff. We talked about eliminating manual scheduling, people who are using spreadsheets, emails, text messages, all that stuff it's okay, but it's not getting the job done. It's really becoming yesterday's news. And number two, we talked about how you have a text-based solution. So no one's downloading an app. It's streamlining that communication, making it really easy. And you alluded to this earlier, and it's so true. So many of our drivers now are immigrants, and they speak all these other languages. And I always remember having a phone call with a driver years ago, and he didn't speak English very well. And I certainly didn't speak his language. And I remember he said to me, Joe, would you mind if we just texted from now on? Because I know it would be easier for both of us. And I was like, oh. And it was an epiphany for me because I was thinking I was doing everyone a favor by calling them, and they really preferred text. And also, you don't want drivers taking phone calls. So if you send them a text message, they know they don't answer it until they pull over. We'll also talk about all the labor cost savings and all the detention cost savings and all the other stuff, all the savings you get when you don't screw up your scheduling. Talked about the cost of capital and inventory, how people hold extra inventory and the carrying costs associated with that because of the process is not solid. Rescheduling and flexibility, and that is all text-based, makes it really easy. Benchmarking and scorecarding. There's another thing you mentioned that we didn't get into great detail on, but it's measuring turn time. What is that?
Yeah. So for us, going back to your point about smaller KPIs, like 6 key metrics, right? Turn time is something that we wanted to introduce a bit more into the industry. The industry already understands it, but it's been just difficult to pull the data together. It's like the pit stop example I gave in the beginning in an F1 race. You have to understand how long it takes for trucks to check in and check out of your facilities to remove that friction. And so turn time is a metric that we're using to quantify that. So shippers can say, okay, across my 3PLs, across my own facilities, across my distribution centers, how long does it take for me to get the pizza out of the oven, so to speak, right?
I love it. And I think at some point when somebody says, hey, we're a shipper of choice, our turn time is this, and it's reduced 20% since last year, and here's our goal to even get better. And we did this with drop and hook. A lot of companies are doing drop and hook. It requires extra trailers, but it saves, I think, about 2 hours per visit. And we want our drivers driving, not sitting at shipper locations.
Yeah, and look, where we're going as an industry and in the world is towards autonomous trucks and autonomous trailers, and we'll have autonomous shuttles in the yard. None of that is going to work if we don't have some way to measure and say, is it worth going to it from human drivers, right? What if human drivers just became more effective and more efficient? How do we make this thing a no-brainer? Because those things aren't going to be cheap, right? And if you want the system to work together, we got to have better metrics to understand how to improve our operations.
Yep. So I summarized all these and I threw in turn time, but give us your final thoughts. Put a big old bow on this one, Gaurav.
Yeah, look, I think as I would say, a modern scheduling platform company, our approach is to provide frictionless throughput to eradicate manual scheduling. We're not going to be all things to all people, but we are very interested in finding and learning from our shipper customers what are the friction points in their business. So give us a call. I would love to talk to you. Free consultation, just based on all our experience in process improvement to help you figure out how to run your facilities better at velostics.com.
Yep. I'll put a link to your website and to your LinkedIn profile and any other links you and your marketing team give me. I'll put those in the show notes so people can reach out and talk to you. So what conferences will we see you and the fine folks from Velostics at?
We'll be at the Oracle SIG in Philadelphia in the first week of August. It's the Oracle OTM conference. And then we definitely will be at Manifest in January. I'm on the plane every week at some conference or the other. So follow us on LinkedIn and reach out to me, and I'd love to meet you.
Yeah, I'll be at Manifest next year. It's always great. And I know Trimble has a users conference. I think that's in the fall. That's in Vegas. So I'm assuming you'll be there too.
Yes, Trimble's especially in the oil and gas industry, TMW Suite is the largest, has over 40% market share for all the oil companies.
I might be at that one. I might see you there.
Tankers. Yeah, there you go.
So anyway, it's been a pleasure talking to you. I love what you guys are doing. This is such an important area. We've gotten so much better with the transportation management system and warehouse management systems. Where we still are lacking is handoffs, and handoffs is where so many of the problems are. So I love that you guys are jumping on that big problem. Thank you so much, Gaurav.
Joe, thank you for the opportunity. It's been a pleasure talking to you, and I look forward to seeing you soon.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank all of you for listening to my podcast. Your support's very much appreciated. Until next time, onward and upward. You have been listening to the Logistics of Logistics podcast, where we engage with leaders in the logistics and supply chain community. If you like what you hear, please subscribe, hit the like button, and leave us a nice review on Apple or Spotify or wherever else you listen. Also, please check out our videos on YouTube and connect with us on LinkedIn. We're very big on LinkedIn. And you can also reach us on the logisticsoflogistics.com, our website.